wanted to sort of spend some time chatting about today was just making picture books and how it relates to movies, or making movies and how that relates to making picture books. I actually come from an animation background and grew up always wanting to make cartoons. But actually, what I came to find out as I was making movies was that what I was really interested in was making stories and telling stories visually. And that is really very much what picture books are about. I thought, coming from animation, that it would be easy peasy, step right over, everything would translate exactly. I can draw, so I can make a book. And what I found was that while there are a lot of similarities and there are a lot of things that translate, of course, it has to be adapted, which is like why when you guys see a wonderful movie, this is adapted from the book, and sometimes you think that was not as good as the book. And it works the same way when I see like something playing in my head like a cartoon and I try and work it out in book form, I think this does not make a good book. You know, this movie in my head does not make a good book. But I have found in my most recent book a really nice way to combine the two things that I love so much, animation and storytelling, and in Flora and the Flamingo, which is a wordless book, which really makes me happy because I'm an artist first and an author second. I sort of think of myself, I write stories as a means to be able to tell them with pictures. And so to be able to tell a story entirely with pictures makes me very happy. It just settles well for me, and I find that it is very much intuitive for kids to be able to read this kind of a book, a wordless book. And for me, that is very important, that they be able to sort of take ownership of it. And I think that wordless picture books allow children to put themselves in even more than books with words, because they must tell the story themselves. As they're looking through it, they have to interpret. The words aren't there to give them any sort of clue as to what might be happening. And so to interpret, they have to draw on their own experience, which means that when they see that character, they are already relating to that character because there are no words to sort of interpret for them or to stand between or to narrate to them. They are now in the book, being the narrator. And the cool thing is that the story almost never turns out the same way twice. Like, I have never had two kids read the book and both had this exact same reaction. There's always something like to interpret. But here, so I'll open it for those who may not have seen it yet. It's entirely wordless and pink. But the story incorporates interactive flaps so that the reader can change the relationship between the characters by changing the poses. Now, really, this is simply keyframe animation. If you guys know about animation, you know it's a series of drawings, and the keyframes are the poses that are the extreme poses in a scene, where a motion starts and where it stops, and the in-betweens are the drawings that sort of fill in. But the wonderful thing about our brains is that we are wired with something called persistence of vision, which means that our brain sees things in a series of still images but strings them together and allows us to fill in the motion, so that when you're moving this, your brain fills in the gap and it becomes this nice fluid movement. So when I had this idea, I thought, this is exactly what I do. Like, this is animation, but it is a picture book, and it allows the kids to change the pacing themselves. And pacing is what I think is really key in the difference between picture books and motion pictures. In a movie, things are paced out for you. The editor does a fantastic job of putting things together, and you can tell by the speed at which the film is shown or the way in which the scenes are cut together, if they're long and sort of beautiful panoramic and cinematic feeling scenes, or if they're a series of short and choppy things. You get a feeling of, you get that anxious feeling, or you get this sort of relaxed feeling. And in picture books, we don't have that same sort of ability to be the constant editor, because the minute a child picks up a book in their hands, they're going to read it at their own pace. You might intend for parts of the book to go quickly, and there are some things that you can do to facilitate that sort of a feeling, less words on a page and breaking up the page into smaller illustrations. But then I thought, you know, maybe picture books are a place to embrace this difference between motion pictures and picture books and not try to dictate the pace to the reader, but to actually let the reader dictate the pace of the book. One of my favorite places in this book where it was sort of like a moment where I realized that could happen, is this sort of peekaboo sequence that happens with Flora and the Flamingo, where they're both hiding, and he peeks, she can peek, they can see each other. But I have seen kiddos play with this page for what seems like an indefinite amount of time. This can go on forever. How long have you played peekaboo with somebody? You could stay on, you could just flip one, and you could move on to the next page, or you could flip it twice, or you could play that game as long as it amuses you. And I think there's something really comforting and yet empowering about that to the young reader, that they are taking control of this story and how it progresses. Not only are they narrating it themselves, but suddenly they have become the editor and the director. You are sort of just guiding them. You have set up the film locale, so to speak, but when it comes down to it, you're putting it into the hands of somebody who is not only the critic, but a participant and an actor in it, and the director as well, if you let them be. And I think that is something that picture books kind of have all over motion pictures, is that ability to put yourself in it and hold it, that sort of tangibility. And you take ownership of it, not just physically, but like emotionally and mentally as well. And I think that is where the true magic of picture books lie, because then as soon as you realize that you can read stories, you realize that you can make stories and be in the stories, and it becomes this wonderful cycle. It's a really wonderful collaborative process too, though, I will say, the bookmaking process. I really, really enjoy working with my editors and my art directors, and I find that they help me make the books even better. I brought a couple of early dummies, and I can pass these around, and you guys are welcome to like come up and pass them around. My early dummy was quite a lot like what was the finished product, but I had flaps on every page, and it was a little overwhelming. There was so much that went on every page, and it was a little too much, to be honest. And this book, when I first made it, was only 16 pages. And then the finished book ended up being 40, I think. But we didn't add any drawings. We just spread them all out. And that is something I think is really nice. You know, I did this because I have two small boys with very short attention spans, and I knew that they liked action-packed things, you know? That was their sort of natural inclination. But in spreading it out, I think in that one way, I was able to sort of set up a pacing that was different. And what I have found was that sort of lingering pacing, that ability to sort of spread it out and focus on one thing at a time, is another thing that picture books really do so well, so much more magically than any other medium, film or anything, because so much of our entertainment is like coming at us all the time. It is very much like sort of an assault on our senses, and books can allow us to sort of take a step back from that and take it when we want it, with that page turn. Like, you take in that bit, it is presented for you, and when you're ready, you get to move on to that next bit, which I think is really, really nice, that kids are able to have a medium that today allows them to slow down when so much is fast. And that kind of slow, steady interaction, often with somebody reading it to them or with them, is something that is so much more valuable today than maybe it has ever been before. To retrain our brains to stop and think and ponder and just be. Books allow that in a way that is really exciting to me. I suppose it's sort of counterintuitive to get so amped up over being low-key, but but that kind of dichotomy is really interesting too. So that's pretty much what I wanted to talk about today. I thought if we have some time, and I think we do because I'm a fast talker, that I might do a little drawing demo, and I would love to take questions from anybody that has them. And so I'm going to step over here. Is the lighting okay for you guys if I step over? Taking back from animation again, which is it's all like line-based and simple shapes, and I still draw that way. I very much embrace that way of drawing. I like to search for my dad is a mathematician, and he calls them elegant solutions. The simplest way, but most beautiful way that you can do things. I love fancy stuff, but in my work I like to search for that elegant solution and the easiest and most natural way to solve a problem. So I'm going to draw a flamingo. And he's really just a series of simple shapes. I like to start with this little oval for his head, and a slightly larger oval for the body. And then just using a single line, you can connect them. And it's really just building one shape on the other. This next line is just a mirror of that first single line that I drew that crosses over. And another oval. And another oval. And then his legs are really just a series of sort of inverted triangles and diamonds. Another triangle, and another triangle, and another triangle, and another, and pretty much just another. His beak is really just like a cylinder with a cone on the end. And then you just sort of connect the dots. And I should have brought my pink marker out, right? We could have colored him. But do have a flamingo. But simple, simple. Thank you. And if any of you guys have questions, I'd love to answer. I'd love to know what you want to know. Yes, Miss Kathy Bunnell.
How did you do your research to get the flamingo?
That is an excellent question. I actually do a lot of, well, for the flamingo, I went to the zoo. I'm lucky enough to have a zoo. I went and actually drew flamingos. Then I went online. Google is an invaluable resource, and was able to pull up all sorts of National Geographic footage of flamingos, and then just photos of flamingos. And I would draw and draw and draw until I sort of understood how they were put together, even their skeletal structure, because I wanted to understand how they could actually move. Then I watched a lot of ballet footage, the Moscow Ballet, and a lot of pas de deux that had been filmed, so that I could see dance moves that a flamingo could actually do. Flamingos' knees bend backwards while ours bend forward, so pliés are really tricky for them because they cross that way, and their shoulder joints are a little different than ours. If you can imagine, it would be like having your elbows the other way. And so I wanted to strike poses with them that would be actual dance poses, but actually physically possible for a flamingo as well. So that was a lot of fun, playing matchmaker with ballet and flamingo. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
I'm intrigued by the construction of the book, and former children's librarian, so of course working in the library market.
Oh, yes.
Hold up. And did you purposely have them come out this way instead of going this way?
Yes.
One more question along with that. If when the first one is torn off, how is that going to affect, like the peekaboo scene? Is it still going to work without that flap?
You're going to tape it back.
Do you know? I recommend double stick tape, but they are glued on, and we played with that a lot. My initial dummy actually had a whole second piece of paper, like like one piece of paper glued to the other, and then it was a die cut that popped out, but it made it really sort of cumbersome and hard to get at the flaps. You were sort of, well, you can see there was like a little cut, but you kind of had to like edge your finger over there, and it became really not as enjoyable and not as intuitive. You were sort of like, what am I supposed to do? Like, there are flaps, I think, oh look, but it wasn't really easy. We also had to think of a cost-effective way to produce this that would allow us to get the same effect, but still let the book be affordable so that we could get it into schools and libraries in the hands of small people and not just make it like an art or a coffee table book. My art director, Amy, actually came up with the idea of using a glue, like a glued-on flap, and it was a conscious choice to have it bend down. For me, that was the most natural. Coming from animation, that's the way in the old days. When we would flip the paper, it was hooked at the bottom and you would flip it down from the top. So for me, that was the most natural. We've actually just finished a second book of this, though, not with a flamingo, but with a penguin. And Flora and the penguin are ice skating, and the flaps hinge in towards the gutter of the book so that you can move the characters back and forth across the page. It's hard to explain. It's actually, the flaps are printed on the front and the back in that book, so they move back and forth. But they actually hold up pretty darn well as to the library question, and are easily reattached, which is the key. We did try and find like the sturdiest means of getting them on there. Thank goodness for tape, though, too, Scotch and otherwise. But what's interesting is that when we were designing the book, we anticipated it selling more in bookstores than in libraries and schools because of that. Because, I mean, what happens when you get a pop-up book? You play with the pop-up book and then, a page rips and suddenly it doesn't work anymore. But I've been really pleased that it is getting into so many library and schools, and I get notes from people all the time saying like, well, we've just taped it on again, like it's gonna keep going around and around. One nice thing that was a detail that the folks at Chronicle added was this sort of rounding of the edges, so that no matter how often you play with it, if it had a sharp corner, it would look worn and get bent more easily. And so this is slightly more durable, and it's on there, But yes, I mean, and I want the book to be played with and loved and destroyed and and chewed on maybe. But one interesting thing to note is that the story works, maybe not as deeply, but it works whether you flip no flaps, whether you were to only flip the flamingo's flaps, or whether you were to only flip Flora's flaps. Through the entire book, they would flip Flora's flaps. Oh my gosh, flip Flora's flaps, flip Flora's flaps. But the story it may not allow for the same sort of pacing, but the story would complete in the same way with the flaps or without. But it might lose a little depth or a little bit of interestingness. But those were excellent questions. Yes?
Will you tell us about your paper and your Prismacolor? Are you using pens and pencils?
I will. I use only pencils. I use Prismacolor pencils. They're wax-based colored pencils, and I love them. I am not much of a painter. I admire painters so much. They have a very zen sort of existential quality about them, and their ability to love the sort of quixotic nature of their medium. Paint just does what it wants to do, and I am far too type A for that. I like to know what's going to happen when I put my pencil on the paper, and so they allow a lot of control, and so I love that about Prismacolors. I also started using them when my boys were just babies, because I could put a pencil down when they needed something and come back to it and not have to worry, has the paint dried? Was I in the middle of a wash of watercolor and oh no, they've just, emptied the fridge? I don't know. There go the eggs. I needed to be able to stop or pick up quickly and not have to worry about a whole lot of setup time. I just leave my box of pencils out and there's no getting paper towels, there's no mess, there's a lot of pencil shavings. And I've learned to keep my coffee cup away from the pencil sharpener because I was ingesting way too many pencil shavings. Not that there's a good amount of pencil shavings to ingest, but I was drinking a lot of them. And the paper I use is not too thick. It's not a board. I use Canson brand vellum finish Bristol. It is thick, it's bendy, it's probably like twice the weight of one of these pages in the book, but most importantly it allows me to see through it when I put it on a light table. I still transfer all my sketches by hand. I'm old school, so I might print up a sketch to blow it up to whatever size I need, then I put it on my light table, I put a piece of paper over it, and I line draw just like I was back at DreamWorks, just like I was doing cleanup animation again. Trace it out very carefully with my mechanical pencil and then set to work with my Prismacolors, and it's really just a series of layering and layering and layering. The entire book is pink, but I think I counted there are like 27 different colors of pencil that go into the book. Various shades of pink, there are some like dark browns, there's actually like a dark blue that is in some of like the bottom layers of shadow, and I just build up and build up with increasing levels of pressure until I've got this smooth and completely opaque surface, and then I can even go on top of that. And it's a really wonderful medium. I don't have to use a fixative on it. I don't have to do anything like that. It's very permanent and it's durable, and I love them. If they ever go out of business, Prismacolor, I don't know what I'll do. Pick up a computer, I guess.
Buy them out. Buy all them.
Do you know what? Periodically, Prismacolor discontinues pencils and then brings out new. And like 5 years ago, they discontinued Deco Pink, and I was like a pencil hoarder. I was like stopping in at stores. I was ordering online. I had like a wad of these pencils that I had like doled out. I don't know if you all know that Elaine Seinfeld episode when there's a certain thing that she likes that gets discontinued, and I would be like, is this Deco Pink worthy? Should I use a pencil on this? So yeah. Yes, ma'am.
What are your favorite colors and what's the name of the red you use?
My favorite colors, I will tell you, Prismacolor has, they make like 150 different colors of pencils, but I do have some absolute favorites, and they're my favorites because no matter how outlandish or how like one end of the spectrum or the other they are, they blend with every other color Prismacolor has. You might get out your notebooks, right? They have a series of black colors: black raspberry, black grape, black cherry. They're indigo blue, goldenrod, yellow ochre, scarlet red, that's the red, raspberry, so there's black raspberry and there's raspberry, Tuscan red, artichoke, and bronze. And they all layer under or over any other color. Like once you've built up like your layers and layers, like I could have indigo blue on the bottom and then maybe do a layer of artichoke, and then I could put scarlet red over on top of that, and I could blend them all together, and you're going to come up with something entirely new. The trick is when you're layering your colored pencils like that, you're never going to get darker and or lighter than your bottom color. Like it's always going to, when you start blending, it's always going to be able to go back down to that. So I work very much, even though I don't paint, I work like a painter doing an underpainting with like my darkest colors, hitting those darkest shadows, sort of blocking it in with a color, and then working progressively lighter. Because if I ever decide like, oh, I really wish that were really, really dark blue black. If I haven't started with that, I will never get it that true dark blue black. I might be able to get it pretty dark, but not as saturated. So I'm very deliberate in the way that I build up my layers. Consequently, or vice versa rather. If I want an area light, I have to like plan for that, like not like a oil painter, but more like a watercolorist, in leaving areas that I know I want to be light. I can't put anything dark under that, or I will never be able to bring it up to that light. That darkness will always bleed through. So when I start out a book, I make myself a color key. I'll work up a sample piece, and I'm very conscientious about keeping track of how I build up the layers, and then I make notes, like I used this, then this, then this, then this, then this, then this, finish it off with this, and I keep tabs so that I'm able to recreate that sort of color palette and maintain a consistency throughout an entire book. And it's really useful because sometimes we'll do the book and it'll be months later we'll do the cover. And when you're not in that groove, you have to go like, how did I make that pink? Wait a minute, I have it right here, and you're able to recreate. So yeah, I keep a lot of notes. Yes, ma'am.
You might have said how you do this, but when you say blend, what are you talking about? Is it just the pencil pressure?
I am using the
or is
actual pencil pressure. Prismacolor does sell like a blending pencil, which is it's essentially a wax stick. It is clear. They also sell like colored pencil burnishers, which is just, like a little burnishing tool, which is sort of like a flat roundish piece of metal. But I find that what those do is take the pigment that you've put on with your layers and just sort of mush it out. So it's never that truly saturated as if you would have used a pencil. So, like for example, when I do the Flamingo, I start with like this black raspberry, then a raspberry, then there's like a carmine red, then a pink, then a blush pink, then like this deco pink, and cream, and I would build up and back down and like work them all together. But then I would pick the color that was closest to that hue that I wanted it to end up being, and I would color really hard with it. In his case, blush pink. Then I could go back over with any of those other colors that had already been layered into him, and that helps bring those up to the surface. At that point, it's like glazing painting, like acrylic, and then you work with like an acrylic medium and you mix a little bit. Because once you've completely saturated the paper with this sort of wax Prismacolor mix, any other color that you lay on top of it doesn't go in, there's nowhere for it to go. So it just sort of lays on top and lays on top again, and it becomes very much like glazing, but you're only using the pencils themselves to do it with. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Yes, ma'am.
Publishing. I noticed some of your books are Tristan. You have different publishers. You have difficulty finding publishers. How do you go about with that?
Do you know, different publishers publish different sorts of books. And so when I've written a story or when I am being hired by a publisher, they have a very, very specific needs set. Viking Penguin, who publishes my book T-Rex, they do sort of like smart, funny, edgy. They also published like John Cheska's The Stinky Cheese Man, and they're sort of funny but well put together books. And yet when I had come up with Flora, they said, this is a lovely story, but it's not our sort of book. And so took it to Chronicle, and it is their sort of book. So what I try and do is just to do my research. I try and stay really current on reading what is out there in the bookstores. And if there's a book that I like, or a book that is a sort of book that I like, I find out who made it. And often you'll find on the copyright pages it includes the editor and the art director. So you could even find out like specifically who at that company likes to make that sort of book. And I think once you have one book done, it becomes easier to get another and another. They sort of become your business card, the books do, because then they're seen by people and they're able to flip through them and see the kind of work that you do. But it's a wonderful business to be in. It's full of nice people, and everybody wants to make good books. And so if you have a good story, the odds are there's somebody out there who will want to help you tell it. You just have to find the right person. Yes, in the back.
Just one more.
What's your favorite book that you read?
My favorite book that I've read?
And what you made?
Oh, that I've made? That's tough. It might be this one, because there are no words, I think, and that feels the best to me. I feel like I was able, ironically, I was able to say exactly what I wanted to say without saying anything.
Says it all. Molly, thank you.
Thank you all very much.
Very animated.
Ba-dum-bum-bum.